All right, good morning, everyone. So today's topic is going to be shorter than most topics. However, George had mentioned that we should talk about absorption rate. One of the conversations I always have when I'm talking to a seller is they really need to understand absorption rate. And it's something that we don't really talk about because what we talk mostly about pricing a listing is comparables, right? Comps. And so when I have a conversation about listing a property, you really have to have the seller share your knowledge about absorption rate first because it impacts pricing. It impacts how aggressive you can be on pricing. It also impacts where in the range of pricing you can actually consult the seller to be. So for example, if comparable homes have sold between 250,000 and 270,000, you've got a range of about 20,000. The absorption rate is really going to determine how aggressive you can be at the higher top of the range, or if the absorption rate is higher, which means it doesn't absorb as many properties, you'd be at the lower end of the range, near the 250,000. So the absorption rate really comes down to supply and demand. That's what it means. It's a gauge of what is the supply, what is the demand. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. I'm going to show you kind of the behind the scenes of it, and then we're actually going to do a demo because the easiest way to do it is actually use a live example. So I'm going to log into one of my MLS that I have access to, and I'm going to show you how the absorption rate is calculated and how do you provide insight to your seller or your buyer when making an offer using absorption rate. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And then if you guys could just give me a thumbs up to make sure that you guys see my screen here. Perfect, Joe. Thank you, Joe. All right, so let's go in here. And absorption rate, it just means the demand and supply indicator. And this is something you should have a conversation with when you're prospecting, whether it's a for sale by owner, expired, if it's someone in your database that you're going to go on a listing appointment with, or even if it's just bringing someone up to date on how the market is. It's something that we don't talk about, but it's so important. And behind the scenes, this is what really impacts what happens in real estate. So the way you calculate the absorption rate, most MLSs will calculate it for you, or they have a widget that'll do it automatically, but it's usually for the entire MLS, not necessarily for a neighborhood or a specific price point. I typically like to do it based on price point or a specific neighborhood. If you're in a market where you have condos, whether it's like a metropolitan market like Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Austin, Tampa, Washington, D.C., you can actually even do it on an actual specific condo building if your MLS breaks that data down. So I'm going to show you a couple of those examples in a few minutes in the demo. But the way you calculate it is you take the properties that have sold in the past year and you divide it by 12, sorry. So you take the properties that sold in the past year divided by 12, because what we're looking for is we're trying to see the average number of monthly sales. If you take it anything less than 12 months, it might give you a skewed representation of what the demand and supply is. So I like to divide it by 12 because it gives you the average of monthly sales. So S, which is the average monthly sales, equals this right here. Once you have that number, you take the active listings and divide that by this number, the S. And that'll tell you how many months it will take to sell all the listings at the current demand that are available in that price point. Any questions so far on this? I think once we get into the demo and I show you guys an example, it'll probably click much quicker. Anybody have any questions or anything so far on that? Okay, so let's jump in and do one other piece of information before we get a demo. In my opinion, if you have less than 3 months of average sales, if your absorption rate is less than 3 months, there's a seller advantage, which means that there is more demand than there is supply, which basically means there's more buyers than there are sellers. 3 to 5 months, I consider that a balanced market. So right now, a lot of people or a lot of fear is being created that we're slowing down, that the market is going towards a buyer's market. Well, let's take a look at the numbers. And you will see that, in fact, even though we've slowed down, we're still in an extremely heavy seller's market. And then 5 months or greater, that's a buyer advantage. So it means where there's more supply than there is demand. And I'm actually going to show you guys that right now, depending on the price point, some price points are in a buyer market. And I'm going to show you guys that as well. So this slide here is a great one that I share with when I go in on a listing appointment, because I want to set the stage so that they understand what absorption rate is. If it's less than 3 months, I consider that to be an advantage to the seller. It means demand is outpacing supply. 3 to 5 months absorption rate means it's a balanced market. Or 5 or more months, it's definitely a buyer market, which means that there is more supply than there is demand. Okay. Let me take a look real quick here. All right, we're going to jump into the demo because I think this is really where it's going to kind of, what do they say, tire meets the road or rubber meets the road. All right, I'm logged into one of the MLSs. This is the Daytona MLS here. I'm actually going to go to the main menu real quick. In this MLS, they actually have a widget right here. It actually calculates the absorption rate for residential real estate, but for the entire MLS. Okay, so if you take a look, July of 2021 right here, the absorption rate was slightly over 1.45 months. That means if the current rate of buyers, it would take about a month, almost a month and a half to sell all the listings that were listed in the MLS. All right, now if you take a look, it went slightly higher, came back down near January of 22, but now we're starting to trend back up. So if you look at this graph, you're like, uh-oh, it's trending back up. But then if you actually do the numbers, look at this. It's 1.75, and last year it was 1.44. That's really not any much of a difference at all. Because if you look at the scale, we went from about just under a month and a half to a month and 3/4. So it's still extremely seller heavy. So we are slowing down a bit, but we might be going 115 on the highway. And now we slowed down to maybe like 105. We're still going about 30, 40 miles an hour higher than the speed limit. If your MLS offers this, this is a great just visual to see how the trend is going. One other thing you can do is you can actually go ahead and type in a specific city for this. If you type in a specific city, it'll actually calculate that absorption rate for the residential real estate for that specific city. All right, so we could see that in the city of Port Orange, Florida, the absorption rate last July was just over a month. That means if all listings were to sell at the current pace in a month, we'd have no listings. It ticked up a little bit. January, it went down, and then we're ticking up a little bit again. Still, strongly seller advantage. Remember, let's go back to this real quick graph right over here, where we're saying if it's less than 3 months absorption rate, seller advantage. What does that mean? When you're talking to a seller, you can get aggressive on pricing. You can list on the higher end of the range. You can be much firmer in terms of negotiating prices. All right, let's go back to our demo here. All right, so why if your MLS doesn't offer this, or you're trying to figure out for a specific price point? Well, let's follow the formula. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to take a price point. I'm going to search a price point. I'm going to change it to what had closed, because remember, we need what has sold in the past year, 365. I'm going to take a $250,000 price point to 350,000. Most markets across the US, this is kind of the bread and butter price point. I know if you're living in a higher price point market, it might be higher, but I want to prove a point. So if we take a look in the past 12 months, in this MLS, there was 2,261 residential properties that sold between $250,000 and $350,000. So we take this 2,261 and we're going to divide this 2,261. We're going to divide it by what number? By 12, because we want to get the average monthly sales. 188. I'm going to just round down. 188. That means that the S in our formula here is 188. So we're going to write this down. We'll just jot it down here, 188. Now we have to find out how many homes are available right now, active listings in this price point. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to just hit active. So now it's going to take a look. We have 217 properties that are active. So to calculate the absorption rate, how long it would take for us to sell all those 217 homes, in that price point. We take 217 divided by 188, 1 month and slightly over 1 month, 1.15. Okay, so now that we have this 1.15 for this price point, we go back to our key. Look at that, way less than 3 months. So in this price point of 250 to 350 in the Daytona MLS, it's still an extremely strong seller's market. Even things have slowed down, it still really didn't make an impact at all in that price point. So when you're talking to a for sale buyer, or when you're talking to an expired, when you're talking to someone on a listing appointment or a pre-listing or how the market is, this is what you should start with before you even touch comps or figure out a home value estimate. Now, I'm going to show you another example. Let's go ahead and up our price point. We're going to go 700,000 to $1 million. Let me see, make sure I have no zeros in there. Okay. So if we take a look at this, we're going to go back to close because we want to see what's sold in the past year, 365 days. There was 422 up here. You guys can see that 422 sales. All right, I'm going to jot that down. What do we have to do with that? We're going to come to 422, divide it by 12. So approximately 35 homes between 700,000 and $1 million sold every month. All right, now let's go back and see how many are active right now in that price point. There are 204 active. So we take 204 and we divide it by the 35 that sold, 5.8. Let's go back to our key. What are we in this price point? We're in a buyer's market in that price point. Even though the real estate is hot, if you have a property that's between 700,000 and $1 million in the Daytona Beach area, you are in a buyer's market, which means the seller's got to get aggressive with their pricing. They have to be able to show the property. They have to be able to listen to your suggestions to paint, change carpet, upgrade, be having that house available to show at any moment's notice. Because what the market is telling you in this price point, there's too much supply and not enough demand. Does that make sense? All right, one final example, and then I'll open it up to Q&A and clarification. So I'm going to go and say you're in a condominium market, right? So in Daytona Beach, Florida, or in Chicago, or in Tampa, or Orlando, we do have condos. So I'm going to look at this one real quick. All right, this condo here, I just want to see all activity in here. So I'm going to look and say, this condo is called Ocean Grand. It's a nice condo built in 2006, situated near the river in Daytona Beach. You can see kind of where it is. Let me zoom in on this map so you guys can see. It's right here. So back to the Halifax, and then you got ocean views as well as walking to the ocean. There were, in the past year, there were 4 sales. Now, I didn't put a price point, so any sale, there was 4 properties that sold in that building. So we take 4, we divide it by 12. Now we get 0.33. What does that mean? That means every 3 months, one had sold. Okay. So let's take a look at that and see how many available are for sale. None. There's nothing available for this condo. Okay. If there's nothing available, your absorption rate is immediate, which means it's less than 1 day. So if you're a real estate owner, business owner, and you want to farm an area, this is a way you find out where are the fish biting. If you can get a listing in this building, you will sell that immediately because the absorption rate is telling you there's more demand than there is supply. So if you want to send out get a home valuation postcard, find out what your home is worth, are you looking to sell? You want to know how much equity you've built up over the past 12 months in your property? This is the building you should target. Okay. It doesn't matter what price point is, because these selected price point, there was 4 sales in the whole building for the year, and there's nothing available for sale. That means even if you have 1 listing, I'll guarantee you'll be able to get that under contract within days. Okay. Absorption rate matters, and it's a very important conversation to have before you start talking about comps and what price we should price at, because a lot of this will dictate the kind of marketing and approach that you need to have. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions. Let me check the chat first. Is this recording immediately available after the call, and how do we access it? Ken, that would be a Tiffany question. We'll answer that. Will it be posted on YouTube? Question, MSI means month supply of inventory. Okay, questions, clarity, comments, anybody? It's basically open mic now.
Hi, can you share the first slide?
This
Thank
one
you.
right here?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this should really be part of your pre-listing packet. Take this slide, screenshot it, do it the exact same way. And this is going to, very importantly, this is a conversation you need to have with your database. So when you're talking about how's the market, educating them, make a TikTok video out of it, make a Reels Instagram video out of it, put a Facebook post. The other thing that you guys can do is, if you have screen recording software like Berrycast or Cast-O-Matic, go ahead and do this exact search that I did for wherever your database is and email them that video. This is a way to find out what the market is doing. If I had not done this for the price range of 700,000 to $1 million, I would have thought that those properties are flying off the shelf as well. But the data from the MLS is telling me no, it's not. The price point of 700,000 to $1 million in the Daytona Beach, Florida market is in a buyer's market. It means there's more supply than there's demand. Okay, so when you're targeting that price point, or let's say you have a listing or someone in your database has a price point at that price, we need to get very aggressive with our pricing, our showing. The house has got to be impeccable. You got to, if you need to change the carpet, I mean, that's the conversation you have. 250 to 350, you could have cockroaches in there. It could be stains on the carpet. Chances are you're probably still going to sell that property and get top dollar, probably multiple offers, since we saw that it was much more demand than there is supply. Let me go back here real quick. All right, any other questions, comments?
Hey, Lee, I just wanted to say thank you for this information, because this is a very good skill for all of us to build and learn more about this. This is part of what we do. We're realtors.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Tony. And the other thing that you can use is this just isn't for sellers. When you're working with your buyers and they want to kind of drag their feet and sleep on it and think about it and maybe not get pre-approved, or, you know, get their house ready to sell because they need to sell in order to buy, you need to have the absorption rate, because depending on their price that they're buying, we noticed in here, if they're in this price point, okay, but if they were in that 250 to 350,000, let's go to 400,000 actually. And we can take a look. There's 367 active. The closed were 3,025. So 3,257 divided by 12. We're looking at 271, right? But then we said active was 367. 367 divided by 271. Again, less than a month and a half supply, which means if you're a buyer, you got to have your stuff together. Okay. You got to be, you know, you got to have your down payment ready. You got to get your pre-quals got to be strong. You got to be able to get your inspector in and out of that property. You got to probably waive some items that come up on that inspection report. You got to be ready to move. You got to be able to go and get this property, because there's a lot more demand than there is supply. So it works both ways, buyers and sellers, to have that absorption rate conversation. If you're doing a buyer consultation, you start off, it's very important, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, to understand what does absorption mean and what the market is telling us that we can't see visually, right? Depending on that price point. I like price point. Now you can also break it down. As I said, I did it based on this building. You can also do it based on subdivision. If your MLS breaks it down to subdivision, the only thing you have to be careful for subdivision is sometimes a subdivision might be too small, so there's not enough sales to actually, you know, get an accurate absorption rate. But you can see if like a subdivision only has 1 or 2 sales a year, it's going to be a seller market, because there's more demand than supply for that market.
Mm-hmm. Hey, does anybody know if we have this in the Stellar MLS for Central Florida?
You can run the numbers just like this, because I have access to Stellar. This one's just easy because it calculates it real quick. Like it shows me how many available, how many sold, but you can also calculate the same exact formula in Stellar, in Space Coast MLS. If you're in Illinois, you can do it through the MRED MLS. unless the MLS provides you the data. I like to have this exercise done with the seller or with the buyer, because then they can see, I'm not making up the numbers, they can see what it is. And if they get that click in their head, like, oh man, yeah, you're right, this thing's moving off the shelf, I gotta really, and that's also how you determine motivation too. If you showed this to a buyer in that $250,000 to $400,000 range, and they're still dragging their feet, getting their pre-approval, or canceling on showings, that's not a motivated buyer. Same thing with your seller. If you show them this and yet they still want to price $50,000 above in that $700,000 to $1 million price range, we're wasting our time. It's going to sit on the market. We're not going to get showings. You're going to have resentment. You're going to hate me because it's your fault. No, it's this. What I'm telling you as a professional is I'm the economist of choice. I'm bringing you this data. This data is live. It's accurate because I can calculate it every single day. Robert, you had a question. Go ahead.
Allie, and I know your experience here, but for other agents, how specific do we really need to get with our sellers? Because looking at, the Daytona area, I mean, if you jump out to where I am, I'm Ormond by the Sea. We're talking about a very specific market. Can you talk more about some more specifics in market areas?
Sure, absolutely. So here's what I would say. When people are looking for a home, because you have to look at it in the eyes of a buyer. So when you're talking to a seller, it says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, where is our buyer going to come from? Okay. And chances are that our buyer is looking in multiple areas depending on their price point. Because if there is a specific neighborhood or school district that a buyer wants to buy, that's a completely different story, because that buyer is willing to overpay or pay above ask or waive contingencies. But most buyers aren't like that. Most buyers are looking for a home to meet one of their life events. But let's take a look at Ormond by the Sea here. Let me see if it'll calculate some results. All right, it's telling me there's nothing active in Ormond by the Sea. I'm not sure if that's accurate, if I just need to refresh this data real quick. If you're looking at a specific area, if you're looking at a specific subdivision or building, it may not have enough sales to accurately gauge that. So you
Allie,
can
zip coded. It has to be zip coded. They give us Ormond by the Sea, but no one uses it because no one knows where.
Oh, because nobody in the MLS or the agents, when they put it in there, they don't have that. Okay.
If
So
you
what
put it
I-
in there, no one finds it. 32176.
So what I would do is I would do this for that specific one. I would actually go ahead and see if I could draw on this map and do a map search. Okay. So let me see if I could, I know I could do it when I'm doing here. Let me just go ahead and do this little box. All right. Is that kind of an accurate estimate of Ormond by the Sea, Robert?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay. So if I did the map search here, and you could do this again, live with your seller or buyer. Okay. There were 78 properties that are active. But what I want is I want to look at the closed first, because that's going to determine the rate. So we're going to go 360, 480 properties sold. So if we take that 480, we're going to divide that by 12. So about 40 properties are selling a month, right? And we said it was, I think it said 74 was active. Let me just double check. 78. So 78 divided by 40, we're looking at almost 2 months. Again, still a seller market. There's more demand than supply. However, it's going to be a little bit slower of a market than the overall Daytona Beach market. So still, again, pretty aggressive, but if you saw the numbers, it was like 1.1, 1.3, not as fast. So sellers have a little bit more leniency. Again,
Allie,
aggressive. Go ahead.
I live out here and I'm helping us here with the learning moment. Now, there's two different things going on here. There's some very, very high-end homes. There's a ton of condominiums. And then there's the old 1950 homes that I can't believe what they're selling for, but it's a very mixed market.
Yeah, so you can actually then go down here and take based on year built, right? So let's just take that right now. And let's say between 1950 and let's say 80, right? And you can run the same numbers. So there's 47 homes that are above $200,000 in Ormond by the Sea right now active, built between 1950 and 1980, right? So if we saw how many closed, same thing happened in that 317 last year sold that were above 200,000, built 1980 to 1950 to 1980. So we'll just divide that real quick. 317 divided by 12, we're at 26, let's say. So if we take the current active, which we said was 47 divided by 26, we're still roughly 1.8 months, even in that older home. And then if you really wanted to get down to the details, let's say between 200 and 250,000, it'll give you a more accurate one. Okay, so yes, you're definitely right, Robert. There's condos there. There's multi-million-dollar homes on the river and on the ocean. And then you've got your older homes in the middle of that area. But this is a great way for you to also, like, well, every morning when I log into the MLS, the first thing I look at is I look at this number right here. This tells me how much inventory total there is in the MLS. This has been trending up for the past 2 months. This number last year, the same time last year, was 644. So our inventory has more than doubled. And yet, if I checked it, what I would have thought is, oh my God, inventory doubled, which means we're going to slow down heavily. Buyer demand was still there. So when you calculate the absorption rate, you still see that homes are still selling. There's buyer demand because inventory has doubled, yet homes have also sold because there was such a huge appetite for homes. Eric, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if I make this a monthly thing to track, and then I start seeing like an increase, is there a certain like amount of increase between each month to where we would have to start? Because it is 12 months of difference, and we know that it was really hot the last like majority of it. And if it cut off like really dramatically, would that, like, is there a rate of difference between each month that we would have to start seeing like something different? Like if it went from 40, like the average is 40, but only realistically 2 homes sold last month, like that would be a huge drop off, right?
Yeah, so I use 12 months to get you a really good gauge of the average sales. Now, let's say, for example, we change that to 6 months or even 3 months. So let's do this example real quick. We have 250,000 divided by 350,000. The reason I use 12 months too is because I want to have the number be as wide range as possible. So when you're talking to a seller, I don't want them too confused either, but let's go ahead and do 90 days. So 250,000 to 350,000, we have 217 are active, but we need to closed. So we'll go to closed, and that closed is going to show us, remember, I want to go 90 days. So I'm going to change this to 90 instead of 365. So in the past 90 days, which would take us back to roughly beginning of May. All right, let me see if it'll actually calculate it or if I'm going to have to just go ahead and redo this real quick. Hold on 1 second. Okay, closed. Okay, so in the past 90 days, because we changed that to 90, in the price range of 250 to 350,000, 479 properties sold. So we're going to divide this by 3 because it was only 3 months. So about 159 sold per month. Okay. Now we go back and we change this to active. When we go to active, it's going to show us what's available right now. 217 divided by 159, 1.36. So even if we use the last 90 days, it's still an aggressive market in this price point for sellers. So yes, you're right. You can track it every month. But what I do is I just go in there and I track it right away because I want the live data. What's going on today? Right? So you can calculate that right there. Does that answer it, Eric? Okay. Natasha, go ahead. You had your hand up?
I have a question for you, Ali. I kind of jumped on the call late, but I know there are a few newer Illinois realtors on the phone. By any chance, do you have access to the Illinois MLS?
Well, of course.
To see if it's available to track it?
Of course I do. Give me 1 second.
So maybe we can kind of show them.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me try to log in here. See if it'll let me log in. Get this bar out of the way. All right. All right. So basically, if we're tracking the Illinois MLS, it might be a little bit different, but we're just going to go to search general. Okay. Now I'm going to do the whole MLS and I'm going to do detached single, which means it's a single family home, not attached to anything, right? The other thing I like to do is I like to just click this and then uncheck everything so I can just do active. I don't want to see back on market, new price, or no, just active, okay? So if I take a look at active, now this is the entire MLS. So with the MRED Illinois MLS, you have to be a little careful because one thing I love about the Illinois MLS is that there's one MLS. So you don't have all these multiple MLSs everywhere overlapping. So let's take a price range. Give me a price range, Natasha.
Let's say 350,
To what?
700,000.
Okay, I'm gonna narrow it down to 500 only because if you have a buyer, they may not be looking at such a large gap.
Yeah.
Okay, or if you're going on a listing appointment, chances are it won't be that much of a large gap. So 350 to 500, how many homes are there? Active, so I'm gonna rate the active 2,147, but we need to find out the close. So we're gonna go back. We're gonna go ahead and uncheck this and do closed, okay? And then when we go closed here, 157,494, that's a lot, but we're gonna take a look at how many that is over the past. I have to make sure that this is actually closed for the same time period. So hold on one second. Let me make sure the time period is also eligible to be picked in here. Months back, there we go. All right, so months back, we're gonna go back 12 months. Let's see what that gives us. Okay, so in the past 12 months, detached, which means single family homes, 350,000 to 500,000 price point was 21,759. We're gonna divide that by 12. Okay, so approximately 1,813 homes sold per month. So we take our active, which was 2147, divide that by 2147 divided by 1813. Here's your inventory right now. Here's your absorption rate, 1.18. So in this price range in the Illinois MLS, sellers have advantage still. Does that make sense, Natasha?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So same thing, you can do it, just the way you're calculating your close, you got to come back here and put months. So let's just do one last quick example here. Let's go back 3 months. Let's do 90 days. So 90 days sold were 6,408. So we'll do 6,408 divided by 12. I'm sorry, no, just 6,408 divided by 3. So 2136. And we knew that there was 2147 available for sale, even more aggressive in the last 90 days. Now, obviously, Illinois, you do have that seasonality. So in the summertime, things are going to sell more, whereas in the wintertime, it's probably going to slow down a bit. So still, even in Illinois right now, this price point, 350 to 500,000, definitely still strong sellers market. Evelyn, go ahead.
You just did the 90-day increment a little while ago. So my question is, if you do 90-day increment over the past year, so would that show you what the absorption rate was by quarter for the past year?
No, it won't, because you would have had to have calculated that every quarter.
Okay.
Because once those numbers, once it's passed, it just gets added to that data. So you can't, unfortunately, you can't say like between February and March what that was, unless the MLS gives you that data. But more importantly, what you're looking at is even when we did 90-day versus 12-month, the numbers were still pretty much the same. I mean, the decimal was a little different. But as I said, if we go back here and we look at the actual kind of key that we have, if it's less than 3 months, there's more demand than there's supply. And that's the key. Whether it's you're talking with a buyer or a seller, there's more demand than there's supply.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions, guys? Comments?
Hey, Ali, Fred DeFalco.
Fred, how you doing? Go ahead.
Good, good. Hey, again, another reminder. Thank you so much, man. Had a couple little interruptions there, but what great information. You know, builders, this is all they live by, right? They live by absorption rates and what have you. Otherwise, they'll go broke. And again, we're in the information business, and that's our main power. And the more we can master the information, I compliment everybody who was on this call, because again, now you've got this valuable information. Now, what you ought to do with it is use it just like everything else for marketing. You know, go in your KV Core, push out some push pages or put some ads in. You know, what is the absorption rate in your neighborhood? Call me to find out, right? You know, absorption rate is the most important part of a changing real estate market. Call me to ask why and how, and get sellers to, you know, so use this information to, again, get your, you know, get an edge on this changing market. Because I'll tell you, there's not many people I'm talking to that aren't talking about all the negative. And this is a time to grow and to shine and be an information specialist. And it's great information, Avi, and great presentation. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Fred. So here's kind of a strategy that you can use when you're reaching out to a for sale by owner. Do the absorption rate. So for example, if that for sale by owner is $300,000, do the 250 to 300,000 and say, in the past 12 months, there was 827 homes that sold between 250 and 300,000. Yours is not one of them. Let's find out why and get yours to be one of those. That's it. And if they don't call you with that, it's like, okay, well, they're probably gonna still try to go at it alone. But that, you know, those numbers, you can't argue with the numbers. All you can do is put insight and give it meaning of what those numbers mean. So again, for sale by owner, you reach out and say there was 871 homes that sold in the past 12 months between 250 and 300,000. Yours was not one of them. Let's call to find out why, and we can get yours to sell.
Perfect.
All right, if there's no other questions or anything else, I'll turn it over back to Tiffany.
There we go. Thank you so much, Ali. We appreciate you.